Jack's hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the fear curling deep inside his chest. The wind screamed through the narrow pass of the Sierra Nevadas, slicing at his cheeks and numbing his fingers as he adjusted the drone's altitude. The controller in his hand blinked, the signal struggling against the storm. Still, Jack pressed forward. He had to. 2 nights had passed since Rex disappeared. 2 nights of silence, of searching, of blaming himself. He narrowed his eyes against the flurry. "Come on, buddy," he muttered under his breath. "Where are you?" The scanner stuttered. Another patch of frozen ground, another cold void. Jack clenched his jaw, guiding the drone slowly along the ravine. Each sweep revealed nothing but jagged cliffs and buried pine. No heat signatures, no movement, only cold, only fear. His breathing hitched as he wiped snow from the monitor screen. Rex had to be out there, somewhere, but the deeper he scanned, the more his mind flooded with what-ifs. What if he was too late? What if Rex had no? He couldn't think like that. Not yet. It had started like any other morning. Jack had unclipped Rex's leash as they hiked near the Ridger routine trail, familiar and safe. But a squirrel darted across the path, and Rex, ever alert, gave chase. 1 second he was running, the next, gone. Jack had shouted himself hoarse. That day, combing the edge of the cliff where the snow gave way to a steep drop, his hands had bloodied gripping icy roots and stones, but the canyon had swallowed his voice. And Rex, that moment, the lunge, the silence looped endlessly in his mind. The nights since then were longer than any storm. The wood stove popped softly, casting shadows across the cabin walls, but nothing filled the silence. Not the ticking clock, not the old radio, just absence. The bowl beside the kitchen door remained full, the blanket on the couch untouched. The leash still hung on its hook, untouched, waiting. Jack stared at them often, and then looked away. Rex had once been a search and rescue dog, steady under pressure and brave in the worst conditions. He'd saved lives, found missing hikers, and pulled children from rivers. But after Jack's divorce, after everything fell apart, it was Rex who stayed, who curled up beside him when the world felt too heavy, who looked at him with eyes that asked nothing but gave everything. They'd both seen pain, and they'd both kept each other going. Now, every step forward was a vow he would not leave without Rex. The snow clawed at his boots, and ice stung his knuckles. But Jack pushed deeper into the ravine, the drone circling above, its buzz lost in the howl of the wind. He hadn't eaten since yesterday. He couldn't sleep. The fear gnawed at him constantly, but so did the hope. Hope that his best friend is still alive. His breath fogged the monitor as he leaned closer. There between 2 rocks, partly buried in snow, a dark shape, a shudder of motion. Jack's eyes widened. His heart slammed against his ribs. He adjusted the lens, zoomed in fur. A tail, it was Rex, still but breathing. A pale blue shifted across the drone's monitor. At first, Jack thought it was static, another false hope. But then it twitched. His heart jumped. He steadied his hand on the control stick, adjusting the drone's altitude with surgical precision. The shape buried under layers of snow and wedged tightly between 2 outcroppings wasn't part of the landscape. It was curled, fur matted, in ice. Rex. He whispered into the freezing air, even though there was no chance his voice would carry. His breath caught. Every muscle in his body tense. He knew that shape, that color, that posture. It was him. He zoomed in. Rex lay twisted, legs tucked, one flank barely rising and falling. His muzzle rested on one bent paw, eyes closed, snow layering over him slowly like time itself was trying to bury him. Jack's stomach dropped. He's alive, but barely. There was no way out of that gap. The slope was too steep, the walls too narrow for Rex to climb, especially with his back leg folded awkwardly underneath him. Jack's throat tightened. A sob clawed its way up, but he forced it down. This wasn't the time to fall apart. It should have been nothing a regular trail. Familiar like the back of his hand. Rex had trotted ahead like he always did, alert but relaxed, sniffing tracks and pausing to glance back at Jack every so often. Then the squirrel came. It shot out of the underbrush and darted across the trail. Rex took off like a flash, barking. Once, tail high, muscles coiled in excitement. "Rex, no," Jack had yelled, already chasing after him. But the dog didn't stop. The edge came too fast, and then silence. Jack remembered the sound his own heart made as he reached the cliff. Calling out, peering down, seeing nothing but white. Now, standing in that same canyon, wind battering his jacket, Jack cupped his hands to his mouth. "Rex," he shouted, "I see you, buddy. Hang on, I'm coming." His voice echoed off the icy walls, bouncing back hollow. The drone hovered above Rex, still capturing the faint rhythm of his breathing. But there was no response. No bark, no wag, only the low moan of the wind and the drone's soft, steady whirr. Jack dropped to his knees. "Please, don't give up on me." Everything swirled at once: the altitude, the cold, the steep climb, the fear. Jack's muscles tensed, and his knees trembled against the frozen ground. What if he couldn't reach him in time? What if Rex was already slipping away? For one heartbeat, Jack froze, paralyzed not by the cold, but by the crushing fear of failure. He wanted to scream, but instead he closed his eyes and breathed. He remembered the flood 2 years ago, how Rex had leaped into the icy river and dragged a child back to shore. He remembered Rex standing between him and a cornered cougar on a back trail, ears forward, not moving, not afraid. He remembered the night Jack came home from signing his divorce papers, how Rex curled beside him on the floor, warm head resting on Jack's foot as he cried into his own hands. Rex had always been the brave one, the steady one. Rex had never once left him. Not when the marriage collapsed. Not when the house emptied. Not when Jack didn't want to get out of bed. And now it was Jack's turn. Jack's eyes opened, his fists clenched around the drone. Remote, snow melting into his gloves. "I'm coming," he said quietly. "I swear to God, I'm coming." He stood, no more fear, no more questions. This wasn't just a dog trapped in a canyon. This was family. This was the soul that had carried Jack through the darkest parts of his life, and he wouldn't let him go without a fight, with one last glance at the drone monitor. Jack reached into his pack, pulled out rope, and stepped toward the cliff's edge. Jack's hands were raw by the time his boots hit the canyon floor. The descent had shredded the last of his energy, but none of that mattered now. Rex lay just ahead, half buried beneath a crust of snow. His coat, once sleek and proud, was tangled and matted with ice. One leg twisted unnaturally beneath him. But his chest, it rose, slowly, shallow, alive. "Rex," Jack whispered, stumbling forward. A faint motion, the tip of Rex's tail, tapped the snow once, a weak thump. It was barely more than a flutter. But to Jack, it was everything. Jack collapsed next to his dog, unzipping his jacket in a rush to create warmth between them. "I've got you," he murmured, brushing snow off Rex's face. "I'm here, buddy. I'm here now." Rex blinked once, slow and heavy, as if trying to pull Jack into focus. Jack ran his hands gently along Rex's body, cold, limp, but no blood, at least not visible. The hind leg was swollen, possibly broken, and he was dehydrated. Weak still, Rex let out a breath that sounded like a sigh of relief. "You held on for me," Jack whispered, tears burning his eyes. "Now I'm holding on for you." Night came fast. The wind whipped harder down here, funneling through the rocks. Jack had to work fast. He gathered what little kindling he could find and struck the emergency fire starter from his pack. Sparks caught, flames bloomed. A tarp ripped, but enough to drape across a pair of angled branches became their shelter. Jack huddled close to Rex, pulling the dog against him as the fire threw weak light against the stone walls. "We're not dying out here," he told Rex. "Not you, not me." And for the first time since the fall, Rex closed his eyes, not in defeat, but in trust. The next morning, Jack reached into his pack and pulled out the final granola bar. He broke it gently, inch by inch, feeding Rex with soft encouragement. "Easy, that's it. You're still strong, I can see it." Rex's eyes didn't leave Jack's. Every bite was slow, careful, but he ate. Jack smiled through cracked lips. "Attaboy." Then he gave Rex the last piece and chewed on the wrapper, just to fool his stomach. As the cold sank deeper, Rex began to whimper in his sleep, soft, pained sounds that twisted Jack's heart. Jack pressed close and whispered, "Remember that time you pulled that kid out of the river? You were a hero, you know that." His voice cracked, "Still are." He kept talking. Stories from their missions. The first time Rex barked at the vacuum. The time he stole a sandwich and looked so proud. Jack talked until his own eyelids drooped, until the stories weren't just for Rex anymore, but for himself. They reminded him who they were. The cold had drained everything. His phone went black that morning. No bars, no signal, just nothing. He stared at it for a long time before placing it gently back into his coat pocket, as if putting away hope itself. Rationing became real now. Water was snow, melted over the fire. Food nearly gone. He wrapped Rex in his own jacket, layering shirts around himself. The wind didn't care. Still, Jack looked at Rex's eyes, open now. Watching him, and said with quiet strength, "We're not done yet." Time stopped measuring in hours and started counting in decisions. Would he eat today or save it for Rex? Would he try the flare now, wait? Each day the pain grew. His own muscles ached from cold and strain. Rex whimpered less now, too weak for sound, and yet they were still there, still alive. Because quitting wasn't an option. Each sunrise became a promise. If they could make it this far, they could make it another day. Jack tore his glove, gathering frozen branches, a deep slice opening across his palm. He hissed, wiping the blood with a rag. Rex shifted beside him, sniffing, then slowly leaned forward and licked the wound, soft, deliberate. Jack blinked. His lips twitched. It was the smallest thing, but it felt like everything. "Thanks, Doc," Jack whispered, chuckling softly. That was the first laugh in days. In that narrow, frozen canyon, words didn't matter. Jack lay beside Rex, one arm across his back, heartbeats syncing with the steady rhythm of his dog's breath. No commands, no speeches, no pleading, just presence, just to survive as holding onto each other, weathering what the world had thrown at them with nothing but loyalty, grit, and love. Jack stood hunched over the controller, scanning the rocky ledges above their shelter. The wind had quieted for a moment, just long enough for the drone's footage to stabilize. That's when he saw them. Claw marks deep, jagged, recently etched into the stone just 50 yards from their position. Not the kind a dog makes. Jack zoomed in slowly, trying to convince himself they were old, worn, but the snow around them hadn't even had time to settle. Something's out here, he muttered, a tremor tightening in his chest. His breath fogged the screen. Rex, lying beside the dying fire, raised his head weakly. Jack guided the drone further across the ridge, his heart thudding with each blink of the thermal monitor. Rex's heat signature flickered steady still, but now a second light emerged from the tree line. It moved with intent, silent and low, pacing. The shape was large, four-legged, and far too smooth in its movement to be anything but a predator. Jack's fingers tightened around the controls. No, not now, not here. He pulled the drone back. If he lost the feed, he'd lose his eyes in the dark. But he already knew they weren't alone anymore. Jack had drifted into a shallow sleep, curled tightly around Rex. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a dull orange glow over their little hollow. Then a sound rumbled from beside him, hollow. Hoarse growl. Jack jolted upright. Rex was awake, hackles bristling, his nose pointed toward the canyon mouth. Despite the pain in his leg, he forced himself upright, standing as best he could on 3 legs. "What is it?" Jack whispered, reaching for the knife on his belt. The growl deepened. Something was out there, watching, with his breath puffing into clouds and his hands barely responsive. Jack scrambled to reinforce their shelter. He yanked branches from the pile he'd collected earlier, driving them into the snow, angling them toward the opening. The makeshift barrier wouldn't stop a cougar, but maybe it would slow it down. Maybe he could feel eyes on them, just beyond the firelight. His hands bled as he tied off the last of the barrier with shoelace and rawhide. When he turned back, Rex was staring at him, eyes sharp. Neither of them would sleep tonight. For hours, the fire crackled in uneasy silence, then dash movement, a flicker, just past the trees, 2 glowing eyes, low, still calculating. Jack stared through the dancing shadows. He didn't blink, didn't breathe. The eyes held him for a full 5 seconds, then vanished. But he knew what it meant. The mountain lion wasn't scared. It was circling, waiting for weakness, waiting for its moment. Jack stood at the canyon wall the next morning, rope slung over his shoulder, staring at the steep incline. He could climb. If he left now, he might find help. Maybe another drone battery, maybe a signal, but he couldn't take Rex. Not in this condition. His mind split into 2 separate halves: logic and love. If he stayed, they both could die. If he left, he looked back at Rex, who was watching him quietly, his breath fogging. The cold air. Jack dropped the rope. "No," he said aloud. "I'm not leaving you, ever." Jack sat by the fire, hopelessness creeping into his bones. His eyes burned, his body ached, and even the embers seemed to give up on them. Then Rex shifted. He dragged himself forward, slowly, painfully, and nudged Jack's backpack with his nose. "What are you?" Jack unzipped it, and there it was, the emergency flare, buried deep in the bottom, nearly forgotten. His pulse surged. He looked at Rex, who thumped his tail once soft but intentional. Jack choked out a laugh. "You're still smarter than me." The sun had barely dipped when Jack saw the eyes again. This time, closer. No hesitation. Jack struck the flare. A sharp hiss erupted as red fire burst from the tube, lighting up the rocks in a violent glow. He raised it above his head, then hurled. It hard-award the shadows. It landed with a thud and rolled. The light exploded across the canyon, revealing a massive, muscled body crouched just beyond the tress-yellow eyes flaring before the beast leapt back into the dark. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, from behind Jack, came a sound he hadn't heard in days. A bark, loud, strong dot. Rex was standing limping, but standing his ears forward, his eyes locked on the trees. Another bark. The shadows remained still, and then, slowly, the silence returned. The predator was gone. Jack fell to his knees beside Rex and pressed their foreheads together. "You did it," he whispered. "You scared off a mountain lion, you crazy old hero." Rex gave one more huff and dropped down into Jack's arms, eyes soft. For the first time in days, Jack truly believed they were going to make it. The unmistakable thrum of rotor blades echoed off the canyon walls, louder than any sound Jack had heard in days. He staggered out of the shelter, arms waving wildly. Flare smoke still curling faintly from the ground behind him. "Over here," he shouted, voice cracking with exhaustion. The search and rescue team descended fast, boots crunching snow, voices barking instructions through radios. Jack didn't hear all of it. He only knew one thing: Rex was safe, and they were going home. When the basket lowered, Jack scooped Rex into his arms. The dog didn't resist. He rested his head against Jack's chest, and together they rose from the canyon floor. Inside the helicopter, hands reached for Rex, but Jack held tight, shielding the dog like something sacred. "He's hypothermic," one medic said. "He's hurt bad," another added, but Jack's arms didn't loosen. "He's coming with me," he said, voice low but unwavering. The flight was a blur of cold air and adrenaline. Jack whispered to Rex through the whole ride, fingers brushing his ears. "You're okay now. We're okay now." This time, he wasn't just saying it. He believed it. At the clinic, Jack paced the waiting room like a man waiting on the outcome of surgery for his own child. Then the door swung open. "He's going to make it," the vet said, smiling. "Fractured leg, malnourished. But he's a fighter." Jack didn't answer at first, just stared. Then his shoulders dropped, and he let out a breath so long and full it felt like shedding months of pain. "Thank you," he said, voice thick. "Thank you for giving me my boy back." Recovery wasn't quick. Rex spent weeks at the clinic resting, healing, relearning how to walk without pain. But he wasn't alone. Every afternoon, Jack came, sometimes with beef jerky, sometimes with a toy, always with a story. "You should have seen the look on the lion's face," Jack would say, grinning. "Crouched next to the kennel. When you barked, you scared him more than he scared me." Rex would wag, just once. It was enough. These weren't just visits. They were love in its purest form, patient, present, unspoken. When Rex came home, Jack signed back up for rescue missions, but it wasn't the same. He no longer buried himself in work to silence the ache. This time, he returned to serve, to give back what had been given to him. Each mission was different now. Every person he found reminded him of what he almost lost and what he had found again. And always, Rex was waiting at the door when he came home, tail wagging, eyes bright. One day, Jack saw a flyer at the vet's office, therapy dog certification, training. He signed them up that same week. Rex passed every test obedient.com, empathetic, and soon they were walking hospital halls together, bringing quiet joy to children fighting battles too big for their bodies. Rex would lie beside them, head in tiny laps, tail swaying gently. Some kids talked to him, some just needed him to be there. Jack stood by, watching his best friend do what he'd always done best, heal, without saying a word. Months later, when the snow melted and the trees bloomed again, Jack packed a small lunch and helped Rex into the truck. They drove, in silence. No words were needed. At the canyon's edge, they stood side by side, looking down at the place where everything almost ended down, where everything began again. Jack didn't feel fear this time. He felt gratitude. He knelt beside Rex, rested a hand on his back, and whispered, "We did it." Before leaving, Jack reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small toy squirrel brown. Soft, slightly silly, he placed it on the rock beside Rex. "Figured you earned this," he said with a grin. Rex sniffed it, then let out a quiet huff, almost a laugh. Then he lay down beside the toy, tail flicking once. Jack sat down next to him. No more storms. No more fear, just sun, breeze, and the quiet peace that only comes when you've been through the worst and made it through together. Jack had entered that canyon thinking he was on a rescue mission, but sitting there now, beside Rex and the soft squirrel toy on the rock between them, he understood it had always been more than that. It wasn't just about pulling Rex from danger. It was about being pulled from his own. Rex hadn't simply waited to be found, he'd held on long enough to bring Jack back from the edge of something darker. Grief, emptiness, the slow unraveling that happens when you lose your reasons for holding on, and now Jack could see it clearly. Rex didn't just survive, he saved him. The bond between them wasn't born in training drills or trail walks. It had been carved out of snow and blood and the sharp edge of fear. Jack remembered the way Rex had whimpered but stayed close, the way he'd nudged the flare at just the right moment, not out of instinct, but trust. It wasn't comfort that had built this connection, was the fire that only comes from weathering something no one else saw and making it through. Side by side, that kind of loyalty, ... It doesn't happen overnight. It's earned, one breath at a time. Gear could fail. Batteries died. Roads vanished under snow. But trust was what kept Jack moving when his legs screamed. It was what kept Rex breathing through pain and cold. In that canyon, surrounded by silence and the threat of death, it was the unspoken pact between them, "I won't leave you," that had the real power. They didn't have to speak it aloud. They just knew that was the difference between surviving and giving up. Jack had told himself he was doing it for Rex, that every mile, every torn muscle, was for the dog who had once been his partner in rescues. But somewhere in that journey it flipped. Each bark, each look, each soft breath beside him in the dark, they reminded Jack of something he'd buried: his capacity to love, to care again, to believe in something more than just making it to tomorrow. Rex didn't drag him out of the canyon physically, but emotionally, he'd carried Jack the whole way. There had been a time when Jack thought hope was something you lost forever, like a dropped compass or a broken trail marker. But now, as Rex leaned into him, tail flicking softly, Jack knew better. Hope wasn't loud. It didn't come crashing in. It came in the quiet moments, in the steady thump of a tail, the feel of fur against your hand, the way two souls could sit in silence and still say everything that mattered. Jack smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because, for the first time in a long time, it was enough.